Over the course of the next few weeks, I'm thrilled to be taking you guys on a road trip through Utah and Arizona for our first ever visits to 7 national parks and many other epic locations. The southwestern United States is easily one of my favorite regions in the country to explore, but up until recently, the most I had seen of it was Death Valley, a little bit of the Grand Canyon, and a handful of places in Nevada. Ask anyone where you'll find the most spectacular desert scenery in America and they'll probably say Utah and Arizona. To kick things off, we had a loaded 3-day itinerary planned for Zion National Park, located in the southwestern corner of Utah. Zion protects a unique geography of unusual mountain, canyon, and slot canyon formations. With this being our first visit to what is widely considered one of America's best national parks, we really wanted to pack as much into these 3 days as possible. We also made sure to include some unique hiking experiences, many of which requiring permits, as that's another thing Zion is well known for. Now, the main section of the national park is the appropriately named Zion Canyon, and is where many of the park's most spectacular experiences can be found. But when it comes to canyons, I always love getting that bird's eye view before making my way inside. Therefore, our first destination in Zion National Park was its highest possible overlook observation point. For a long time, you used to be able to access this spot from inside Zion Canyon, but unfortunately due to a rock slide, that trail is no longer available. Instead, getting here is a little more complicated, but nothing that should turn anyone away. Visitors will have to make their way to the East Mesa trailhead outside the park, which is about a 25-minute drive away from Zion's east entrance. The last portion of road to get there is a very rough, unpaved road that they don't recommend you take with anything less than a bulky 4x4 vehicle. Instead, you can take the observation point shuttle with East Zion Adventures, which runs all throughout the day and only costs $7 a person. If you'd like to do this, you'll have to make your way to the Zion Ponderosa Ranch Resort, which was easy for us since it happened to be our accommodation for the few nights we were in Zion. Once you make it to the trailhead, the hike to observation point is exactly 7 miles out and back through the forest. The hike is almost completely flat since you're hiking on a mesa over Zion Canyon, so even though it was a bit of a long hike, it was probably one of the easiest we did while in Utah. A little over the halfway mark, we saw our first opening of canyon with rock composition virtually identical to that of Zion Canyon. It happened so suddenly and looks like the earth is eating itself. But this is only a small appetizer for observation point. At 6,570 feet high, observation point is hands down one of my favorite views of Zion Canyon. I absolutely love how expansive it is as you look out at some of the park's other attractions like Angel's Landing, which we'd be doing on our third and final day at the park. I wouldn't be discouraged by the length of this hike or the extra effort it takes to get here. It's well worth doing, especially if you don't have a permit to hike Angel's Landing, since the views are relatively similar. Having said that, if you're tight on time and we're planning to hike Angel's Landing, I'd probably prioritize a few of the other hikes in the park over this one. For example, the Narrows was the other big hike we'd be embarking on for our first day in Zion. This is the park's most popular hike, especially because you do not need a permit like many of the others. The trailhead for the Narrows can be found at the tail end of Zion Canyon and the last stop on the Zion Canyon shuttle. Due to the popularity of the park, vehicles are no longer allowed to drive through the canyon except for a few months in the off-season. Instead, your mode of transportation is a free-to-use shuttle that can be accessed at the park's main visitor center. The downside is it can be difficult to find parking here, as the lot wasn't built with the intention that it would hold enough people for every visitor wanting to access Zion Canyon. We went to Zion in November, which is technically considered the off-season, and were never able to find parking in the second half of either of the 2 days we went into the canyon. Your alternative instead is to park right outside the park south entrance, where businesses will charge you $20 a day. It sucks and was a waste of $40, but it's an option. On the plus side, this made it very easy to stop by Zion Outfitter, also located right outside the south entrance. Here, we rented a dry suit for our time in the Narrows, which also included hiking sticks. Normally, I'd consider this to be a little extra, especially for an avid hiker, but I really don't think I would have done the Narrows without this stuff. The cost came out to $105 for 2 people, which isn't cheap, but again, a requirement if you're doing the Narrows during a colder month like November. Also, I found the hiking sticks to be very useful navigating through the water. Those who are not familiar with the Narrows are probably scratching their heads wondering why you need all these things and what I'm even talking about. But this is an incredibly unique hike through the narrowest section of Zion Canyon. Technically a giant slot canyon, this gorge is filled by a river that can reach up to chest level, but usually keeps below the waist. After making your way to the Riverwalk trailhead at shuttle stop number 9, visitors will walk along the Innocent Virgin River for a mile. Then you'll reach the head of the Narrows in an area called Zion Stadium where you can change into your dry suit. How far you go from here is entirely up to you, as the Narrows extends for more than 16 miles. We decided to do 2 miles out to Orderville Gulch and 3 miles back to the trailhead. While a great turnaround spot, which we will get to in a second, the Narrows is really more so about the journey than it is the destination. Being sandwiched by these ginormous canyon walls that reach more than 1,500 feet tall is an amazing experience. It's absolutely fantastic from the beginning, and you'll be so captivated by the fact that you're hiking through water. But the further you go through the Narrows, the higher the canyon walls get and the more elements you'll begin to see. Some of my favorite parts were when the canyon formed these rounded tunnel-like formations that you walk through, the occasional small waterfall flowing off the side, and of course the end of our hike at Orderville Gulch. This was one of the narrowest sections we saw, maybe the narrowest, and we had it all to ourselves. But above all, the thing that made this portion of the Narrow so cool were the crazy formations making up the canyon walls. The way it goes in and out creates a sort of similar appearance to that of Utah's Zebra Slot Canyon, which is super cool. We even noticed this smaller slot canyon that loops its way back around to the Narrows, which we explored a little bit before turning around. It's worth noting with the Narrows that you aren't actually in water 100% of the time like I was expecting. There are several moments where you're walking on these long stretches of land peeking out of the water, but others, it is just water. This hiking diversity was something I really appreciated, and all things considered, this was easily one of the most unique and memorable hikes I've ever done in a national park. On day 2 in Zion, we wanted to do something a little off the beaten path, a place that was popularized on social media for its super cool rounded cave formations with water rushing through it. This is the Subway, accessed by a hike somewhere between 7 and 9 miles depending on where you look. All trails clocked this in at closer to 8 miles, and though this is long, I had done longer hikes before. What I didn't realize about the Subway hike is that this was going to be the most difficult trail I'd ever done. Why? Well, partially because it isn't really a trail at all. You only really know where you're going because of small paths clear of rocks and boulders where there are faint shoe steps. I should have pieced this together when going through the process to get a permit for this hike. It's not really that hard of a permit to get, but you will need to get it from the visitor center a day before the hike and fill out some information for safety reasons. This permit is meant to limit visitation as only 80 people are allowed in the Subway per day. Those who do experience this hike will make their way to the Left Fork Trailhead about 30 minutes away from Zion's south entrance. It's paved the whole way there, as this road also provides access to the national park's smaller second unit at Kolob Canyon. This is something we didn't have time for during our 3 days in the park, but I look forward to checking it out in a future visit for sure. The hike begins as any ordinary trail would, flat and easy to navigate for about a mile. The views looking down into this canyon with yellow trees lining the creek is honestly one of the highlights of the entire hike. You then make your way down an incredibly steep mountainside where you'll have to carefully navigate boulders until you get to the creek below. I'd say this was the first part of the hike where I realized we were in for a serious adventure. These thoughts were solidified when we then had to cross the creek once, and then twice, and then 3 times. Each time there would be a different obstacle, whether it be a rock scramble or a long jump to the other end. 3 crossings turned into 4, which turned into 5, and in total I honestly couldn't even recall how many times we had to cross the creek. The good news is unless you mess up on the crossings and have waterproof hiking boots, you shouldn't even have to get wet at all on this trail. That is, except for an optional portion at the end which we'll get to. But even when you're not crossing the creek and are walking alongside it, there is rarely ever a chance to catch your breath before you have to climb over more boulders or navigate through tight crevices. Because of these things, you're mostly going through this trail slowly, meaning it feels like it takes forever. It is by all means a mature hike, not the kind of thing I'd normally be into, but I felt really accomplished when it was all said and done, and especially once I had made it to the Subway itself. Now, something I was caught off guard by was how short the famous Subway section was. Like really, it was just this long tunnel and a small turn to the left, that's it. Before the Subway, however, there's a lot of other cool cascades and water features that you should also celebrate having made it to, because it's really when the fun stuff begins. The quaint steps with water flowing over them and giant canyon walls on either side is really a sight to behold. And it only gets better over the next half a mile before you make it to the mouth of the Subway. One of my favorite things I saw, and something I'd recommend keeping your eyes peeled for, was right before the Subway there was this crack in the ground with water flowing through it stupid fast. This is something I'd seen online too, and it was very cool in real life. I love how you interact with this trail as you literally end up walking over the steps with water before making your way into a little opening in the canyon that is the main Subway itself. Like I said, this is only one long narrow tunnel and a turn to the left, but while it lasts, this was absolutely one of the most unorthodox formations I saw in the park. The water flowing through and occasionally creating these small emerald green pools were just the coolest thing. And then at the end, there is a tiny slot canyon filled with water that you can choose whether or not you want to go through to reach the true end of the trail. I got naked so I could go into the water to find the waterfall at the end of the Subway. At first, I was dismissive about this because the water was freezing and I didn't think it would be worth it. But after some canyoneering people mentioned a small waterfall at the end, I decided to go for it. If you're new around here, I'm a sucker for waterfalls, and with this road trip not having a lot of them with it being in the desert, I had to get my fix somehow. Yes, it was small, but a genuinely cool finish to the slot canyon, and I was glad to fork in a little extra effort to make it to the end. Another thing that enticed me to do this was the fact that the length of the Subway was disappointing, and this was a way to compensate. I was really glad to have seen the Subway after all these years of viewing it on social media, but I do think for a hike this long and challenging, it is underwhelming when the payoff isn't what you think it'll be. I thought the Subway was going to be a lot longer than it was. Now maybe this is an expectations thing, but I think when I come back to Zion someday, this isn't a hike I'll be itching to do again. Like I said, the Subway was amazing while it lasted, but this was a seriously difficult hike, especially when you have to come back and climb up that steep mountainside I mentioned. I'm glad I did this one, but would I recommend it to a first timer? Really, it just depends on the person and what they're looking for. Day 3 at Zion was by far my favorite day in the park as we finally got to check out the park's most legendary hike to Angel's Landing. But before that, we stopped by the Zion Canyon Overlook Trail to experience a short hike that I had heard was well worth doing if you had the time. Well, Angel's Landing certainly isn't taking up the entire day, so we gave it a go in the morning and were very impressed. The hike is only a mile out and back, and to find it, you'll have to park right along the road before the famous Mount Carmel Tunnel. It seems there's two different names for this trail. There's what I've been calling it, which is the Zion Canyon Overlook Trail, but I've also seen it come up on Google Maps as the Pine Creek Overlook Trail. In general, this hike is mostly flat, which combined with the short length makes it an easy option for those less capable. There's a few really cool elements on this hike, like this bridge that takes place over a cliff, and we even had a unique wildlife sighting with this bighorn sheep. We had no idea how he got here, as it was right along this cliff with seemingly no way to get there in sight, but animals always seem to find a way. The view at the end was absolutely spectacular and far greater than you'd expect from such a short hike. You look out at Zion Canyon and the windy road that makes its way to the bottom. I definitely love this view at the end, but we didn't spend too much time here before eagerly making our way to Angel's Landing. This would be our second hike that begins in Zion Canyon and is only accessible by the shuttle system. This is stop number 6 on the shuttle and starts at an area called the Grotto. The views are immediately spectacular as you make your way across a bridge that was positioned over the Virgin River. We spotted a handful of deer at the bottom, one of so many we saw at Zion, which was a surprise to me. As well as that, you had the enormous multicolored canyon walls on either side, which was beautiful, and knowing you were soon going to be on top of one of these really got that adrenaline going. For those of you wondering, the hike in total is about 4.5 miles out and back, with the Angel's Landing portion only accounting for less than a mile. I divide the hike into a few distinct sections, the first of which is your ascent to the inside of this narrow canyon where you have some absolutely awesome views looking into Zion Canyon. The views progressively get more and more dramatic as you head upwards, and eventually you'll be met with the steepest section yet right along a cliff. Luckily, the trail is quite wide up to this point and anyone should be able to do it. The inner canyon portion is mainly flat with not a lot going on. The next point of interest is going to be Walter's Wiggles, a series of 21 steep switchbacks. Though it looks intimidating from the base or from the top, all 21 of these switchbacks are so short that it really isn't as hard as one might think. At the top, you'll reach Scout Lookout, which acts as the turnaround point for those without a permit. It's also where a lot of families choose to stop, as this is where the Angel's Landing part of the hike begins. This iconic stretch of trail can be characterized by its chains and narrow walkways next to these massive drop-offs. Since the early 1900s, more than 15 people have died while hiking Angel's Landing, including 5 deaths in the past 5 years. Mostly these are just stupid people trying to dangle their feet off the edge for an Instagram photo, but it's still important that you carefully watch your step as you navigate this trail. As long as you do that, I think the title Most Dangerous Hike in America, as you see all the time online, is a false narrative. There were 2 or 3 sections that were genuinely scary, but because of the chains you hold on to, it really isn't that bad the whole way through. I was admittedly nervous about this hike, not just because of its reputation, but another reason was crowds. I wondered if it would be packed with people, because in that case it really could be a dangerous hike. Fortunately, due to the permit system they've implemented, I didn't think crowds were an issue at all. There were times where you'd have to wait for others to clear a particular section, but there was also this sense of people looking out for each other in Angel's Landing. The views as you ascend the ridge only get better and better until you get to the end. Here you have my favorite overlook in Zion National Park. Yes, more so than Observation Point, which is practically right above you. I found that being in the midst of the canyon was more impressive than being all the way above it. Plus, you get 2 views, one on either side, and that's something that Observation Point can't counter with. We ended up spending like 2 hours at the top of this thing, taking in the views and resting up. I absolutely loved it, and I thought it was a perfect ending to one of my favorite hikes I've ever experienced. Angel's Landing was exhilarating and engaging virtually the entire time. It wasn't tame at all, but it also wasn't as dangerous as I expected or as terrifying as many people make it out to be. I honestly think most people that are in a good physical and mental condition and hike a lot should try to do this at some point in their life. It was the most perfect way to wrap up 3 incredible days in Zion National Park, which is now one of my favorite national parks I've been to. This park combines the 2 most important things I'm looking for in a national park: scenery and hiking. The former is among the most impressive of any desert park, and the hiking might just be the best of all national parks. I think the collection of trails here was perfect because there really was something for every skill level, and each of the 5 we did were distinctly different from one another. So if you've ever thought about visiting Zion National Park in Utah, I'd seriously recommend it in a heartbeat. Just try to time those permits right with your trip so that you can have the best possible experience. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd really appreciate if you gave this video a like and subscribe to Travel Dash so you don't miss any future content like this. Stay tuned because next up is Bryce Canyon National Park. I'll see you there. Bye guys.